Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So in this video, I have made a few changes to our application before this video started. So on the screen, that looks like we have just added a plus button right here, and I'll show you quickly what that took. What we've done here, instead of just displaying a search result, we are displaying the search result and also the plus button div right here, which is just a plus text along with some CSS. So the CSS here is very simple. We just have a width and height of 30 pixels with a border radius of 30 pixels, which is what gives it that circle look. And then the background color is the same transparent color, and then the font size and margins is everything here that I've added to create a circle and as well as a plus button. So in this video, what we'll go through is actually making this plus button functional. So what we want to do is create a context using the React's context API and save all the cities that the user actually adds to their favorites. So we'll go ahead and start on that. We'll go to our store folder. So we'll create a new file here called citycontext.tsx. And the point of this file will be to hold the context and also to create a component that can wrap around our other components to be able to use the context in them. So we'll import React from React. So firstly, how do we create a context? Well, React has this method called createContext to create it. We'll call it cityContext, and the method is called createContext, which will get imported from not.vm. And this just takes a default value for now. We'll leave it at undefined. So the next thing is the component that will hold our context and be a wrapping component for us. So that'll be called context provider or city provider. This will just be a simple function component. So let's add our type. And it'll return, so this is supposed to hold our context. But what should be our context? We have no idea what should be in here other than undefined. So our context is basically going to be two variables for now. One will be an array of cities, and the other will be a method, how we can update our cities. So the interface will look something like this. Cities will be an array. So for now, let's keep it at any array. And set cities will be any for now. So let's figure out what both of these types should be. So the first thing, we know that cities should be some kind of object. So we will obviously need an interface for that. So our city will have a name. It'll also have a latitude of a string. Now these could be numbers or strings, but we're not going to do any calculations on them. So we don't really need to set them to a number. So for now, we'll just use strings. And that's it for now. Later, we can extend this into more. For example, weather data could also go in here. So here, now we can type this at least. So create context should be iCityContext. So this is create context is actually a generic type. And now this is complaining that undefined does not equal iCityContext. Well, that is true. So we should also have an undefined type here. And for cities, now we know that this should be a city array of cities. And set cities, we still have no idea. So let's work on our component for a little bit. And we know our cities should hold inside of the context, but these two variables need to come from somewhere. What should be the values? Well, we know that cities and set cities sounds a lot like useState. So let's use the hook called useState, which will hold an array of cities. And to begin with, it will be an empty array. And useState will come in from React. So this will be cities and set cities. So to figure out what type this will be, we just have to follow whatever useState returns. So if we hover over this one and see what actually is useState, so useState will actually return a react.dispatch and react.setStateAction of a city array. So we can just copy that and paste it right here. So since we're using React useState, we can just use the same type that it returns. So here, now what should this one return? Well, city context will actually, or create context will actually return an object which has 3 properties. So one of those properties we'll use in here. So let's see, city context dot has a consumer, a provider, and a display name. So the provider is the one that we'll use, which is a simple React component, but it takes in a value. So the value is the default value. We know that what should the default value be? Well, it's just these 2 variables here. So let's create a variable for this, which will be nothing but cities and set cities. And we can just pass that in here. So everything looks good now, and in here what we actually just need to put inside is props.children. So what we could do is wrap our entire application in this city provider. So let's go ahead and export that. And we will also need to export the city context to be able to use it in different components. And if we go to our application, we know that our entire application needs to use the cities array, because in our home component, we need to change the cities array, for example, add to it or remove from it. And we know that the content, which is basically our weather page, we need to be able to read all of the cities and maybe select one or the other. So let's use the city provider right here and wrap our entire application in it. So now the router becomes the child of city context. So the children here will just be the entire router. So let's open our search component, which right now just has a search result and the plus button. We know that the plus button needs to add to our cities list. But first, before we do that, we need to actually use the context. So we'll just create a variable called context here, and we'll use a hook called useContext, which will be imported from React again. And the useContext, all we need to pass in is the context that we created earlier. So this will be called city context. And down here, what we can just do is just print it for now. So let's stringify the context.cities. And here this says this is possibly undefined. So we just need to add an exclamation point here, which is for making sure that this will never run when this is undefined. This is just a simple TypeScript function that you can use. And here you can see the default array, which is empty array. So next we can add our click handler. So on click, we need to run a function which will add to our cities array. So the first thing we need to do is actually create our city, which will have 3 different variables. Name will be the result.name. So remember, our search results are being saved up here in the state. And for now, let's just keep the latitude and longitude at 0, and we can update this in the future. So the next thing will be to actually set our city. Let's see, cannot find city. Let's import that. So the next thing will be to add this new city to our cities list, which will be from the context and set cities. So this will take a brand new array, but we need to preserve whatever was in the cities. So that'll be context.cities. And the spread operator here, the 3 dots, basically says that whatever is in the cities, put all of those elements as elements of this array. So it just spreads it in this array. And the last city will be the one we just created right here. So if we save that, it'll set it to our context, and then our component will update because useContext will say that whenever context updates, we get the new variables in here, or the new values, and we just display that new value right here. So it's still empty right here, but if I look up some city here and press the plus button, we can see that our latitude, longitude 0 was set properly and the name was set properly. The last thing I would like to do is actually save whatever the user has added to our local storage, just like we are saving the username. So we know that we need to open our variables and add something here, right? So we're storing all of our keys in this variables file. So this one will be called cities key, and we'll just call it cities. And all of the saving and loading from local storage will happen wherever we have the default value. For now, this one is empty array, but we can pass in a function right here which will return a JSON parsed value of the local storage. So we can get the item called cities, which will be cities key, import it from our file. And remember, local storage can either be null, so it'll return null if it does not exist. So if that returns null, we can just use a string of empty array. So that takes care of our default value, but we also need to set the value to local storage whenever cities updates. So that we can do that with a simple useEffect hook. And this will just run whenever cities updates. So we can add that as a dependency. So whenever this variable up here updates, we run this function. Local storage again has a method to set our item. So it's called set item. And the key we have to provide, cities key. And what will be the value? Well, the value will be a stringified version of our cities variable. So remember, local storage can only store and retrieve strings, but we can use json.parse or json.stringify to interface with it. So here we can see cities is now empty array because we initialized it to empty, but if I look up a city again and add it, we can see that automatically gets set as a JSON variable. But even if I refresh now, the cities variable is being read from the local storage and set to the context variable. So that's all I had for this video. We created a brand new context for our city context, and we are actually storing and retrieving data that we can use in any of our components. So we just used it in our search component, but you can add this line to any component and you'll be able to use the context of our cities. If you have any questions about this, please post them in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn something new in React, I can try to incorporate that in this application. Or if you want to check out some of my other content, for example, I've created a video on MobX, which is a replacement or alternative to create context and the context API. So if you're interested in different technologies in front end, please subscribe.